Millionaire thought he was trapped in an arranged marriage, until the bride removed her veil. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Today's story is titled, Millionaire Thought He Was Trapped in an Arranged Marriage, Until the Bride Removed Her Veil. Now, let us return to our main character. The church bells of Street Helena rang across the quiet hills of Tuscany that morning. The sky was pale gold, the air heavy with the scent of roses and rain. Inside the grand marble chapel, every seat was taken by the elite of New York's business world, whispering behind silk fans and designer glasses. Yet at the altar, the groom stood perfectly still. Ethan Vale, 32, CEO of Vale Dynamics, adjusted his tie with the precision of a man preparing for a board meeting, not a wedding. His expression was unreadable. Behind him, his lawyer whispered, "Just say the words, Ethan. The merger depends on this." Ethan's jaw tightened. "A merger," he muttered under his breath, "not a marriage." At the far end of the aisle, the doors opened. The orchestra swelled. Every guest turned as the bride entered, veiled in ivory silk that shimmered under the light. She moved with quiet grace, but her hands trembled slightly on the bouquet. Her name was Isla Rowan, the only daughter of Rowan Industries, a company drowning in debt. Her father's health was failing, and this union, arranged by the board, was their last chance to stay afloat. When she reached the altar, Ethan did not take her hand. The priest's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling. "Do you, Ethan Vale, take Isla Rowan as your lawfully wedded wife?" Ethan hesitated. Cameras clicked. A muscle in his jaw flexed. "I do," he said flatly. Then the priest turned to Isla. Her voice was soft but steady. "I do." The ceremony ended as quickly as it began. Applause filled the room, polite but hollow. Outside, reporters waited for their first photo of the perfect alliance. Ethan helped her into the limousine, his tone detached. "Congratulations, Mrs. Vale. You just saved 2 empires." She looked out the window, rain streaking the glass. "I did not do it for empires," she said quietly. "I did it for my father." The silence between them was heavier than the storm outside. That night, in the marble foyer of the Vale estate, the sound of their footsteps echoed like ghosts. A folder lay open on the grand piano, the marriage contract, 5 pages long, signed by both. It spelled out everything. No shared bedroom, no emotional involvement, mandatory appearances at 5 public events, and a 6-month termination clause. Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch. "This is a deal, Isla, nothing more." She nodded. "Then let us both keep it professional." But as she turned to leave, the wind from the open balcony caught her veil. It slipped from her head, fluttering across the floor until it landed near his feet. Ethan looked down, and for the first time, truly saw her face bare, calm, and heartbreakingly human. Something inside him shifted. He bent to pick up the veil, but she was already walking away, her voice faint behind him. "Good night, Mr. Vale." Ethan stood there, the silk veil in his hand, the inked signatures of their contract beside him. He had built his life on control, numbers, and logic. But tonight, for reasons he could not explain, a stranger's quiet courage was starting to break through his walls. The rain had not stopped for 2 days in Tuscany. By the 3rd morning, the marble floors of the Vale estate gleamed under gray light, and silence filled every corner. Isla sat by the tall window, the same veil folded neatly beside her cup of untouched tea. Her phone screen showed message after message from reporters and relatives, all asking the same question: is it true? Was it a contract marriage? She turned it face down and whispered, "It was survival, not a fairy tale." Across the house, Ethan walked into his office, his shirt sleeves rolled, his mind locked on numbers. The markets had already responded to the merger marriage. Stock price up 3%. Investors reassured. The deal worked, at least on paper. Yet something about the echo of her footsteps down the hallway last night kept intruding into his thoughts. He had told himself it was just a transaction. So why did it feel like guilt? At lunch, their paths crossed in the dining room for the first time since the wedding. The long table looked absurd between them, a kingdom of silverware separating 2 people who had just promised forever. "Mr. Vale," she said politely, "I would like to discuss the public schedule for this month." "Of course," he replied without looking up. "The contract requires us to appear together at 5 events. We can finish that quickly." "Jagont, 5 events," she repeated softly. "And then what? Silence again?" Ethan set his pen down. "We do what we agreed to do." Agreements are not conversations, Ethan. Her voice was calm but firm. You might get through life that way, but not through a marriage, even a false one. He looked at her then, surprised by the steadiness in her tone. For a second, he wanted to answer, but old habits of control won. He stood, collected the files, and said, "Dinner will be at 7. Formal attire. The board is sending a representative." That evening, the house transformed. Crystal chandeliers glowed, and a dozen guests arrived in tuxedos and gowns. Isla entered in a navy dress, simple but elegant, a thin silver bracelet catching the light. She walked beside Ethan, her expression professional, her posture unshakably poised. "Smile for the cameras," he murmured. She whispered back, "I am smiling for myself." During dinner, an older board member leaned toward Ethan. "Quite a bride you have, Vale. Intelligent eyes. Knows when to speak and when to stay silent." Ethan forced a smile, unsure why those words felt heavier than praise. Later, in the garden outside, away from the chatter, Isla found him near the fountain, sleeves rolled, tie loose. The sound of water masked the tension between them. "You play the role perfectly," she said. "So do you." "Maybe too perfectly." She hesitated, then looked up at him. "I am not your enemy, Ethan. I do not want your money. I only wanted peace for my father. But you treat me like a risk report." Her words landed like cold rain. He looked away, unsure what to say. "Feelings complicate things," he said quietly. "Then maybe complication is exactly what you need." Before he could answer, her phone rang. She stepped aside to take the call, and he heard fragments of her voice, urgent, trembling. "Yes, I will come tonight, please. Just keep her stable." She turned back, pale but composed. "My mother collapsed," she said. "I need to leave for the hospital." Without a second thought, he offered, "I will drive." "You do not have to." "I know," he said, reaching for his jacket. "But I want to." The car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine and the sound of rain against glass. In the hospital corridor, under flickering fluorescent lights, Isla stood by the doorway of her mother's room. Ethan waited a few steps behind, watching her wipe her tears with quiet dignity. When the doctor said her mother would recover, Isla finally exhaled, relief washing over her face. As they walked out together, she stopped at the exit, turning to him. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded. "For what?" "For showing up." Ethan said nothing. But in that simple moment, something shifted again, a small fracture in the wall he had built. And as the rain eased outside, he realized the strange truth. The woman he had married for business was the first person in years who had made him feel human. The following morning, sunlight spilled through the wide windows of the Vale estate, soft and clean after the long storm. For the first time, Isla ate breakfast in the sunroom instead of her suite. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh lilies. She looked out toward the garden where Ethan stood, speaking on the phone, his voice low, his posture rigid but not unkind. When he came inside, he paused, surprised to see her there. "Good morning," she said, her tone polite but warmer than before. "Good morning," he replied, setting his phone down. "How is your mother?" "Better," she said softly. "The doctors think she will recover fully. Thank you for being there last night." Ethan nodded once, almost shy. "You did not have to thank me. I did. Most people would have sent a driver." An awkward silence followed, broken only by the clink of her spoon against the cup. Finally, he asked, "Would you like to see the design floor today? The new prototype facility is ready. It might help for our next public event." She looked up, surprised. "You mean you want me to visit your company?" "I want you to understand what we are protecting," he said. "It is not only numbers on paper." That afternoon, they drove into the city. Vale Dynamics towered above the skyline, all glass and steel. As they entered the executive floor, staff turned in surprise. The rumor of a cold, loveless marriage had already spread, but the sight of Isla walking beside Ethan, calm and graceful, silenced whispers. She listened attentively as he explained the project's renewable tech, medical software, community programs. His voice carried pride, not arrogance, and she found herself admiring the man behind the headlines. In one of the labs, she noticed a framed sketch pinned beside a prototype drone. It was a child's drawing of a paper airplane, signed EV, age 7. "You kept this?" she asked with a small smile. Ethan glanced at it, almost embarrassed. "My father hung it there. He said it was a reminder that every empire starts with a dream on paper." She touched the frame gently. "Maybe you should listen to that boy again." The remark caught him off guard. He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing beyond the polished exterior. There was no pretense, no calculation, just quiet strength. For a moment, the sound of the city outside faded. Later that evening, back at the estate, Ethan found himself pacing by the piano. He had not played since his father's funeral, yet his fingers moved almost by instinct, pressing soft chords that echoed through the hall. Isla stopped by the doorway, drawn by the sound. "I did not know you played," she said. "I used to," he answered, eyes still on the keys. "It helps me think." "Then keep thinking," she replied gently, and stepped closer. The music grew slower, tender. For a few seconds they shared silence that felt like peace. Then the spell broke with the distant buzz of a phone. Ethan reached for it and frowned at the message. "From the board?" she asked. He nodded. "They are pushing for a televised interview next week. They want proof this marriage is real. And what will you tell them?" "The truth," he said, then paused. "Or at least part of it." The following days were filled with rehearsed smiles, joint appearances, and strategic hand-holding for the cameras. Yet each time she laughed naturally, each time she met someone's gaze with kindness, Ethan found it harder to remember that all of this was supposed to be an act. One night, after a charity dinner, they rode home in silence. The city lights slid across her face through the car window. Without looking at him, she said quietly, "You can stop pretending when we are alone. You do not need to prove anything to me." He turned toward her. "Maybe I am not pretending anymore." Her breath caught. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled faintly, looking away. "Be careful, Ethan. Feelings complicate things, remember?" He exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping. "You keep quoting me. I might start listening." As they reached the estate, the gates opened slowly, the sound of metal against stone echoing through the night. Ethan stepped out first, holding the door for her. Their hands brushed for a brief second, an accidental touch that lingered far longer than it should have. When she looked up, her eyes met his under the soft glow of the porch light. No words were spoken, but something unspoken hung between them, fragile, undeniable, and real. And for the first time since the day of their wedding, Ethan realized that the contract was not the only thing binding them anymore. The following week arrived faster than either of them expected. The board's media interview had been arranged for Monday morning at Veil Dynamics headquarters. The public was eager to see the power couple whose union had rescued two empires. For Ethan and Isla, it was another test, one they could not afford to fail. That morning, the lobby was filled with camera crews, assistants, and flashes of white light. Isla adjusted her blazer in the mirrored elevator, while Ethan checked his cufflinks. "We just answer politely and stay aligned," he said. "They want harmony." She looked at him and smiled faintly. "Harmony cannot be rehearsed. Just speak honestly. That has never been my strongest skill." "Then start today," she said softly. When the cameras rolled, the interviewer asked the usual questions about business, collaboration, and partnership. But then came the question everyone had been waiting for. "Many say your marriage was arranged for profit. What would you like to say to those people?" Ethan hesitated. Isla looked at him, steady and calm. He took a breath and said, "It began as an arrangement, yes, but sometimes life surprises you. You meet someone who forces you to see beyond contracts and numbers." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Isla added, "We are learning to build something that cannot be signed or measured. Respect, understanding, perhaps even faith." The interview ended with polite applause from the staff. When they stepped outside into the bright afternoon, Ethan turned to her. "You did not have to say that." "I meant every word," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Even if you do not." "I do," he said quietly. "Maybe I just did not realize it until now." That evening, the two of them returned to the estate. The air was cool, and the garden smelled of rain-soaked roses. Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. They sat near the piano, the same place where their silence used to live. "You know," Isla said, swirling her glass, "I used to think wealth meant safety. But standing beside you, I see it can also be a cage." He looked at her, expression softening. "You are not the only one inside it." They talked for hours about their childhoods, their fears, the people they had lost. Ethan spoke of his father for the first time in years, how the company had been his whole life, how success became his armor. Isla listened without judgment, her eyes gentle. "You carry too much alone," she whispered. "You do not have to." When she rose to leave, he caught himself saying, "Stay for a while." The words surprised him as much as her. She hesitated, then nodded, sitting back down beside him. For a moment, no business existed, no contract, no board, just two people learning how to breathe in the same quiet. Days turned into weeks. Their appearances together began to look less like strategy and more like companionship. At charity events, Isla spoke with empathy that drew people in, while Ethan watched her with pride he could no longer disguise. The employees began calling her Mrs. Vale, not out of formality, but out of genuine affection. But peace never lasted long in Ethan's world. One night, as they returned from a fundraiser, his assistant approached with urgency. "Sir, there is an issue with the finance division. Confidential files have been leaked." Ethan frowned. "Leaked? How?" "We do not know yet, but the timing it started right after the interview aired." The next morning, the headlines were merciless. Vale Dynamics under investigation. Possible internal betrayal. News anchors repeated the same words: breach, scandal, deception. When Ethan reached the office, the board demanded answers. One of the members slid a folder across the table. Inside was an anonymous tip, alleging that Isla had transferred sensitive files from her account to a third party. Ethan's face went pale. "That is impossible." "She had access through your joint calendar," one director said. "The trail leads to her device." He drove home in silence, disbelief clashing with anger. When he entered the foyer, Isla was waiting by the piano, still in her work dress, her expression anxious. "Ethan, what happened?" He held up the folder. "You tell me." Her eyes widened as she scanned the papers. "This is not true. I did not send anything." "Then how did they get your access code?" His voice was calm but sharp. "I do not know. Maybe someone—" "Someone?" He cut her off. "You mean my cousin Adrian? Or is that too easy?" Tears filled her eyes, but she held her ground. "You think I would betray you? After everything? I do not know what to think anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. She set the folder down, her voice trembling but clear. "I thought you were beginning to trust me, Ethan." He looked away. "Trust is expensive, and I have lost too much already." She turned, eyes glistening, and said softly, "Then this cage you live in it is not made of money. It is made of fear." When the door closed behind her, Ethan stood motionless in the quiet hall, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air. For the first time in years, he felt something worse than anger. He felt the weight of doubt. That night, the mansion felt colder than ever. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the tall windows of the Vale estate. Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at the folder on his desk. The words on the printed pages blurred, repeating themselves like an accusation. He wanted to believe her. Every part of him screamed that Isla could not have done it. Yet the evidence was precise, technical, and cruel. His phone buzzed. A message from Adrian Vale flashed on the screen. "You should handle this quietly. The board is losing faith." Ethan closed his eyes, realizing that was exactly what Adrian wanted to turn trust into suspicion, love into weakness. Down the hall, Isla packed her suitcase slowly. The silence was unbearable. Each fold of fabric felt like another goodbye she did not want to make. When she reached the doorway, she looked back once more at the piano where they had shared their first moment of peace. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You said feelings complicate things, Ethan. Maybe that is why you keep running from them." The next morning she was gone. Only a note remained on the kitchen counter. "When the truth finds you, I hope it is not too late." Days passed without a word. The scandal deepened. Investigators found new transactions, hidden accounts, digital footprints pointing again to Isla's device. Ethan's legal team pushed him to file for damage control, to end the marriage quietly. He refused. Something in his gut told him there was more. He began reviewing the server logs himself late at night, line after line of encrypted data. Then, one entry caught his eye. A remote login from an unregistered address, Adrian's personal device. Ethan's pulse quickened. He called his head of cybersecurity. "Trace this IP. I want confirmation before sunrise." By dawn, he had it. The evidence was undeniable. Adrian had cloned Isla's credentials to reroute confidential documents, planning to frame her and seize control of the company during the chaos. Ethan drove straight to the downtown office. When he entered the boardroom, Adrian was already there, smiling confidently. "You look tired, cousin. Bad nights?" Ethan dropped the printed report onto the table. Bad nights end when liars wake up. Adrian's grin faded as the others leaned forward, reading the proof. "You forged internal files and framed my wife," Ethan continued, his voice steady but burning with restrained fury. "You almost destroyed her reputation to take my place." Security officers entered quietly as Adrian's face turned pale. "This is not over," he hissed. Ethan replied coldly, "It already is." When the meeting ended, Ethan walked out without a word. The city outside felt different, no longer suffocating, just empty. He realized what mattered now was not saving a company. It was saving a person who had believed in him even when he doubted himself. That evening, he found Isla at her mother's cottage outside Florence. She was sitting on the porch, sketchbook on her lap, her expression distant but calm. The sun was setting behind her, turning the sky gold and pink. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "I should have trusted you." She looked up slowly, eyes cautious. "You found the truth?" "Yes. Adrian did everything. He will face the law. But that does not erase what I said to you." "Words cannot be erased, Ethan. They echo." He took a step closer. "Then let me change their meaning." He pulled from his pocket the same folded veil she had left behind after their argument. "You said I was afraid of feelings. You were right. I have lived behind walls built from pride and fear. You broke them without trying." Isla's eyes softened, but her voice remained measured. "You do not owe me an apology. You owe yourself a chance to be honest." "I am trying," he said, almost whispering. "For the first time I am trying." They stood in silence, the sound of cicadas rising with the wind. Then Ethan extended his hand. "Come home, Isla. Not for the board, not for the press, just for us." She looked at his hand for a long moment, her heart caught between memory and hope. Finally she rose and placed her hand in his. "Home is not a place, Ethan. It is a choice." He smiled faintly. "Then I choose you." As they walked back toward the car, the last light of sunset wrapped around them like a quiet promise. In the back seat lay a sealed envelope, his formal statement to dissolve the contract that had once defined their lives. The next day, at a press conference, Ethan would stand before the world and say, "Yes, it began as an arranged marriage. But love is not an arrangement. It is what remains when everything else falls apart." But for now, under the fading sky, he simply held Isla's hand as if he had finally found the courage to be free. The next morning, the world was already waiting. Reporters gathered outside the Veil Dynamics headquarters, microphones raised, cameras flashing in the pale sunlight. Inside, Ethan stood in front of the mirror in his office, straightening his tie for the first press conference he had ever truly wanted to attend. There was no legal script this time, no corporate spin, only the truth. When he stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. His voice was calm but firm. "I know the last few weeks have been filled with speculation. Yes, there was an internal betrayal in our company. Yes, there was a marriage contract between Isla Rowan and me. But today, both those things end." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Because trust cannot be bought, and love cannot be negotiated." He lifted a white envelope and tore it in half before the cameras. "This contract once defined my marriage. From this moment, it defines nothing. The woman I married has more integrity than any deal I have ever signed." The press erupted with questions, flashes blinding him, but Ethan only smiled faintly and said, "If you want to know what saved this company, it was her honesty, not my name." Later that afternoon, the video of his speech went viral across every platform. Business analysts praised his transparency. Comment sections overflowed, with messages calling Isla the heart behind the empire. Yet for Ethan, the noise of the world meant little. He only cared about one thing: making sure Isla believed him. That evening, he returned to the cottage in Florence. Isla was on the balcony, her hair loose in the warm breeze, sketchbook open. She had been drawing the horizon, where the sun melted into the sea. He stopped by the doorway and said quietly, "You once told me home is a choice. I am here to choose again." She looked up, unsure whether to smile or to cry. "You did not have to make that announcement." "Yes, I did," he said. "It was the first thing I have ever done for the right reason." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, the opposite of everything their first wedding had been. "The last time we stood at an altar, it was for survival," he said. "This time, it is for love." Isla's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, the world will talk again." "Let them talk," he said softly. "For once, I want the story to be true." He knelt, his voice steady. "Isla Rowan Vale, will you marry me without the contract, without the cameras, just with your heart?" Her answer came with a trembling smile. "Yes." The ocean breeze caught her veil, which she had brought from the estate as a keepsake. It fluttered once more between them, but this time he reached for it and wrapped it gently around her shoulders instead of letting it fall. "No more running," he whispered. "No more cages." The following week, their second wedding took place quietly in a small chapel overlooking the Tuscan hills. No reporters, no guests, only the priest and the sound of the wind through the olive trees. When the ceremony ended, Isla laughed through her tears as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. He leaned close and said, "I used to think I was trapped in an arranged marriage. But you were never the trap. You were the freedom." The chapel bells rang as sunlight poured through the stained glass, scattering color across their faces. For the first time, there were no contracts, no expectations, only two people who had chosen each other freely. And as they stepped outside into the golden light, hand in hand, Ethan knew he had finally learned the simplest truth of all, that real love does not begin with a deal. It begins with forgiveness. After their quiet ceremony, life at the Vale estate changed in small, almost imperceptible ways. There were no more formal dinner schedules, no assigned seats, no lists of obligations. The house, once silent and cold, began to sound like a home. Music returned to the piano room. Fresh flowers appeared on the dining table. The staff smiled when they passed by. Ethan found himself waking earlier, walking through the gardens with Isla before sunrise. She would carry her sketchbook, stopping now and then to draw the colors of the morning sky. He would watch her, realizing that peace was not found in boardrooms or numbers, but in these quiet, ordinary hours that no contract could ever dictate. But happiness, even genuine happiness, is never without its test. Weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from the board. Though Adrian was gone, his allies were still determined to challenge Ethan's leadership. They wanted a public audit, a vote to decide whether he should remain as CEO. Ethan read the letter silently, then placed it on the table. Isla looked at him, her expression calm. "Are you going to fight them?" she asked. He nodded slowly, not with anger this time, with truth. Together they prepared for the board meeting. Isla reviewed documents with him late into the night, offering suggestions he had never considered. "You do not need to prove your strength," she said gently. "You only need to prove your vision." Her faith steadied him more than any speech could have. When the day came, Ethan entered the boardroom hand in hand with his wife. The gesture alone silenced the room. He began his presentation, not with numbers, but with honesty. "For years I believed leadership meant control. I was wrong. Leadership is listening, and the person who taught me that lesson is sitting beside me." He revealed a new initiative, an internal ethics division named the Rowan Project, designed to support transparency and protect employees from the kind of manipulation Adrian had used. "Every empire," Ethan said, "needs a conscience. This will be ours." The board voted unanimously to keep him as CEO. As the meeting ended, the room erupted in applause. Yet the proudest smile in the room was Isla's. That evening they returned to Tuscany for a short break. On the balcony overlooking the vineyards, the same sunset that had once witnessed their cold wedding now glowed warm and golden. Isla leaned against the railing, watching the light fade. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" she asked. "Every day," he answered. "I remember the veil, the contract, the silence. I remember how blind I was. And now? Now I see everything clearly," he said. "You were not the condition of my success. You were the reason I changed." Isla smiled, closing her sketchbook. "Then maybe that is what love really is, not perfection, but change." He stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I used to believe love was a weakness, but it turned out to be the strongest thing I ever had." Below them, the bells of the village church began to ring. The sound drifted across the hills, soft and pure. Ethan kissed her forehead and whispered, "We started with a contract. We end with a promise." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "And this time," she said, "it is written in both our hearts." The camera of life seemed to pull back then, capturing the quiet image of two people who had walked through pride, doubt, and fear only to find forgiveness, freedom, and love waiting on the other side. The story that had begun as an arranged marriage had become something else entirely, a testament that even the coldest deals can give birth to warmth when truth finally meets courage. And in that final light of evening, the man who once thought he was trapped in a marriage of convenience understood what he had truly been given: a second chance, not only at love, but at being human again. The morning after the board meeting, the Vale estate felt alive again. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, scattering across the marble floor like gold. Ethan sat at the breakfast table with a cup of black coffee, reading messages from his team. Every headline now praised his leadership and transparency. Yet for him, the greatest victory was not in the news. It was across the table: Isla, barefoot, sketching quietly, a faint smile on her lips. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think peace was something you had to earn. But maybe peace is what you find when you finally stop fighting." She looked up, smiling. That sounds like something a poet would say. Or a man who is trying to learn from his wife. A few days later, Ethan received an invitation to a gala honoring innovation and social impact. The event was hosted by an international foundation in Rome. They had chosen to recognize Veil Dynamics for the Rowan project, the ethics division he and Isla had built together. When he told her the news, Isla's eyes widened with surprise. "They named it after my family," she said quietly. "They named it after integrity," he replied. "That is your legacy, not mine." The night of the gala, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and the hum of conversation. Guests in elegant attire moved between tables decorated with white roses and crystal glasses. When Ethan and Isla arrived, the cameras flashed, but this time the light did not feel harsh. It felt celebratory. On stage, the host announced, "Tonight we honor Ethan and Isla Veil for redefining leadership through compassion." As they walked up together, the applause was thunderous. Ethan took the microphone, his hand brushing hers for reassurance. "I once believed success was measured in profit margins and market shares," he began. "But I was wrong. True success is measured by how much good we leave behind. I would not be here without my wife, Isla Veil, who taught me that kindness and courage are not opposites, they are partners." He stepped aside, and Isla, slightly nervous, took a breath before speaking. "People often ask if our marriage was arranged," she said with a soft laugh. "And the truth is, yes it was. But love arranged something else entirely. It arranged a chance to grow, to forgive, to begin again. We did not plan for love. It planned for us." The room fell silent, some eyes glistening. Then the crowd rose in applause. For the first time, neither Ethan nor Isla felt like they were performing. They were simply telling their truth. Later that night, after the gala, they walked together through the quiet streets of Rome. The city lights shimmered against the cobblestones. Ethan carried his jacket over his shoulder, his tie loosened, the award in his hand. Isla slipped her arm through his and said, "Do you realize how far we have come from that cold wedding day?" He laughed softly. "I do. That day I thought I was losing my freedom. I never imagined I was finding it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we deserve this ending?" He looked at her with a small, knowing smile. "No, I think we earned it." They stopped at a small bridge overlooking the Tiber River. The water reflected the moonlight like a silver mirror. Ethan took her hand, his voice low and steady. "We have built an empire, Isla, but the only thing I want to protect now is us." She squeezed his hand. "Then promise me one thing. Anything. Never let the contract define our story again. Let love be the only document that matters." He nodded, lifting her hand to his lips. "Consider it signed." As the camera of memory would one day recall this moment, it would not see a millionaire and his arranged wife. It would see two people walking toward a new life, equal, honest, and free. The wind off the river carried her laughter into the night, and somewhere between the lights of Rome and the heartbeat of the city, the world seemed to pause, giving them one quiet, perfect second of forever.